Some people say I'm privileged. They say I'm always, in the right spot at the right time. Is this coincidence? I don't think so. As I got older, I really don't find my life journey so far as a blend of coincidences. I understood more and more over the years what was guiding me and, why the things happened the way they did. And the internet really contributed its fair share to it. Understanding the internet really helped me to understand myself much, much better. But first things first. I'm a native German. I'm born into a middle-class family. I was the first one in our family who got to university. I studied economics. And I was also somehow the black sheep of the family, because I didn't walk down the safe and secured way. My parents always wished I would. So I played pretty well basketball. I was part of the German national team. But I stopped it when it became too commercial. I didn't feel like being used. After my studies, I got offered a well-paid job at a German TV channel, but I rejected because, I didn't want to commit myself for something I wasn't convinced of. And frankly speaking, I was never ever convinced to work for anyone. So I always did my own thing, and it was always about connecting people, and it was always about building bridges. So I never walked down a steady straight line, but I feel that I always had an unflappable sense of direction. After my studies, I took 1 year off. I bought a one-way ticket to New York to visit my aunt and to explore the US. I somehow got stuck in the Northern Bay Area, in Sausalito to be more precise. It's just when you cross the Golden Gate Bridge, the next stop. It was there when I met an Austrian, and he answered my question, is this beach private? He said, it's all yours. So I took him at his words, and 1 year later we got married. It was him, actually, who introduced me to the world of networks. He introduced me to The Well, which was really the very first online community. The Well was launched in 1985. In 1987, I got my first email account there, and this was, a whole 7 years before the internet got pictures. The Well, actually, they had the office just 1 street below where we are living, and every time, when we got this sweet, sweet smell of grass up where we were, I know we were on. So I was never ever interested in all this technical stuff of the network part. What I really wanted to understand was what makes this internet so much different from what we had before. And I was really lucky to be there at the Well, because there were really a bunch of people who were digital natives in a much more radical sense than the date of birth would imply. So in conversations with them, it was really, really easy for me to get lost and, to forget about set agendas and any fixed kind of outcomes. It was very easy just to follow the dynamics of these open conversations. And this was the time when I really fell in love with open processes. I was open, I was kind of curious, and I always had my set of values where every action, every project I was working on was based upon. So my projects, they brought me to 120 countries on this planet. I worked with governments, I worked with big institutions, I worked in war zones and so-called safe ground. I worked with top managers, I worked with head of states, but also with very, very ordinary people. To illustrate all this, I tell you a little story. And the story is about the NATO Summit 2012 in Chicago. Stephanie Barbst, a German woman, she was by then head of public diplomacy at NATO. She asked me in preparation of the summit if I would help her to connect this closed, very closed organization, NATO, with online activists in the Middle East and Afghanistan. And I said, wow, this is a bold move. I got a couple of sleepless nights because I'm not really a friend of NATO, but finally I agreed and, I took this job. So there I was, in between these two worlds. On the one side, there was NATO with 14 levels of hierarchies, from the humblest employee up to the Secretary General, Rasmussen these days. Everything was really mapped out. On the other side were my people, these online activists in the Middle East and Afghanistan who had access to communities where NATO had no stand-in. It wasn't really easy to convince them to support Stephanie in their efforts. But Stephanie had made some really remarkable statements in an interview we did beforehand, where she laid out how she was planning to connect these two very, very different worlds. This would challenge NATO in its organization. And she was ready to take this challenge, and she really got things going. So within these 14 hierarchies, she set up a matrix organization of 30 people from various departments within NATO. These 30 people, they were all really excited and curious, on our mission to connect these two worlds. 4.5 months before the summit, we launched the platform We NATO. We started out with a live stream between Stephanie and Joey Ito. Joey Ito is, I would say, truly one of the guys who was always at the forefront of the internet movement. He's a close friend of mine, and he's currently head of the MIT Media Lab. So these two, they had a live stream, and they were discussing a book. This was the day when the NATO machinery started rolling. The classic PR department kicked in, the NATO ambassadors kicked in, every department involved kicked in, and they simply overrolled with their hierarchy and with everything, they were so well trained in. They simply overrolled the matrix. Within a day or two, this entire We NATO thing crashed. And it crashed because of a reason we were discussing before. At NATO, usually, only 2 people were entitled to give public statements. So we knew if we didn't succeed that our 30 people within the matrix weren't allowed to give comments, to make their own remarks in real time to this online community, it wouldn't work. And this is exactly what happened. So actually, this We NATO, it went on until the summit in Chicago, but I left the job earlier. Steffi lost her job after the summit, and this whole thing went on in the very traditional, polished NATO way. But looking back, actually, for me, this We NATO wasn't a failure. It really straightened out things in my head for a new project I was already working on. And this was a project which is in rural India. I call it Chanvar Castle. Chanvar is a small village in the heart of India, like 1,100 people living there. In this village, the parents kill their girls because they can't pay the dowry. Women, they don't have any rights. The tribals are tremendously suppressed by caste, and the average family earns less than €1 a day. In this village, I have built a skate park. This is almost surreal. why a skate park? Why skateboarding, you might ask? Skateboarding or skateboarding culture is all about counterculture. It's against mainstream. It's all about disobedience. It's all about resilience in finding your own way. Everything what we don't have in this village. So my simple assumption was, would this skate park set up as an open process disrupt this village enough to drive change? 2.5 years later, I can say, yes, it can. This skate park has built bridges over deep, deep chasms. It really has vanished. It has broken down caste barriers. We are almost at, gender equality, at least when we look at the skate park. And it has really brought up activities and programs one could never ever thought of from the beginning. Today, I hear parents say that their kids have, for the very first time in their lives, a choice, that their language has really become more precise, has become more defined. The number of fights has went down, and this was really astonishing for me to see over the last couple of weeks, because we are going through some rough times, that the tribals and the Yadav stand together when me or the skate park really become under attack. So I think this is proof of concept. What have I done? Well, we have defined, or I've defined, a couple of golden rules. One rule is girls first. This is a very simple thing. Whenever a girl goes to the skate park and says girls first, she would get a skateboard. No discussion. The second rule is no school, no skateboarding. This really swamped the kids into the school. Since we are there, the government school got 3 new teachers. And above all, my job and everything, and everyone who is working with me, our highest priority, our biggest premise is really that we walk our talk, that we do what we say, and that we really treat everyone equal. And within this frame set, our job is nothing but to observe what is happening. And whenever one kid or one villager is starting to move, we again bring in our network and design together with this kid or with this family or with this villager a very individual learning path. So we do not work with predefined programs. I actually believe that current government aid is failing because they work a lot with these programs which are defined for the villagers and not with them. So I personally, I have defined my job in this village that I really do become obsolete one day. So whenever the villagers are ready to move for themselves, by themselves, this is the day when I leave. Hopefully off to the next open process, wherever or whatever it might be. Thank you.